How many of you would say that you are chocolate addicts? Would you describe yourself as a chocolate addict? Would you describe yourself as a cola addict? Is there some kind of food or drink that you're addicted to that you eat or drink all the time? If there is, what does this mean in economic terms? In this module, entitled The Elasticity of Demand, we are going to learn what that actually means. So in this video lesson, we're going to concentrate on a key idea that becomes very important. Up until this point, we have learned about the law of demand. And what we have learned is that the law of demand tells us that when the price of a good rises, the quantity demanded falls. And when the price falls, the quantity demanded rises. But there is another question that we don't yet have the answer to, and that is the question, how much? When the price of a good goes up, does quantity demanded rise by only a little, or does it rise by a lot? When the price goes down, does quantity demanded rise by a lot or by a little? Well, that is the question that we answer when we talk about elasticity of demand. We answer the question, how much demand changes in response to a change in the price of a good or service. So we're measuring the sensitivity of the quantity demanded to a change in price. We will focus on learning these things. The first thing I will do in this video lesson is to explain how economists measure the sensitivity of quantity demanded to price changes. From there, I will identify what makes the demand for a good more or less sensitive to changes in its price. And then finally, I will show the connection between price sensitivity and the total revenue of a firm or a business in the market. So let's get started. The first question we have to ask is, well, what is elasticity all about? What does this actually mean? Elasticity of demand can be defined in this way. It's a measure of how strongly consumers respond to a change in the price of a good. And we calculate it in a mathematical way, using a formula. It's the percentage change in the quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in the price of the good. And so what we are doing is measuring responsiveness. For example, when gas prices go up, we still buy a lot of gas, but we may carpool or use mass transit. So different goods respond differently to changes in their price. Sometimes the price of a good can go up or down and the demand doesn't change very much. Other times, the price of a good can go up or down and the demand can change significantly. It can change a lot. Well, we have terms for this in economics. Economists say that the demand for a good or service is elastic if consumers respond to a change in price with a relatively large change in the quantity demanded. So think of a very thin rubber band or an elastic waistband. What happens when we pull it? It stretches. Elastic is stretchy. So we're looking at the stretchiness of demand when there is a change in the price of a good. And if the demand for a good changes a lot or stretches a lot when there is a change in the price, we say that the demand for the good is elastic. Because consumers are very sensitive to a change in price, meaning that demand changes by a large amount when there is any kind of a change in price. But the opposite can occur. Sometimes demand can be described as inelastic if consumers respond to a change in price with a relatively small change in the quantity demanded. That you can think of as a thick rubber band, that when you pull on a thick rubber band, it doesn't stretch very much at all. So we say that there isn't much stretchiness or elasticity, and that means that when the price changes, the demand changes very little. And so consumers are said not to be very sensitive to a change in price. That is called inelastic demand. Finally, there is a third term that we can use to describe demand, and that is if consumers respond to a change in price by changing their quantity demanded by the exact same percentage. The price goes up by 20% and their demand falls by 20%. That would be called unit elastic. It's neither elastic nor is it inelastic. It's considered to be unit elastic. And so, going back to the previous example I used, when gas prices go up, people still buy a lot of gasoline. We don't like it. When the price of gasoline goes from $3.50 to $4, we complain a lot. But because we have to get to school, we have to get to work, we have to drive, we use our cars, people grumble and they go and fill up their gas tank anyway, and they pay the higher price, and they save money elsewhere in their budget. So the price goes up, but our demand doesn't change very much. That's inelastic. But if the price of a vacation that you want to take doubles, well, you don't have to take that vacation. You don't have to go to Disney World for Christmas. So if the price of a Disney World vacation doubles, demand is likely to drop by a lot because consumers say, well, I don't have to take that trip, so I'm not going to pay double for it. I'm going to not buy that vacation. That would be elastic demand. So the next question is, well, what are the determinants of demand? Just like we had determinants, or the determinants of elasticity of demand, rather. Just like we had determinants of demand, we have determinants of the elasticity of demand. There are certain variables that determine whether the demand for a good is elastic or inelastic. So let's take a look at these. First of all, the demand for a good, and whether it's elastic or not, can be determined based on whether the demand is the good is a necessity or is a luxury. In other words, if you need something, even if the price goes up, you're still going to buy it. But if you don't need something, then if the price goes up, you won't buy it. That's what we mean by necessity versus luxury. Okay? So think about, if you have diabetes, do you need insulin? Yes, you do. So even if the price of insulin were to double, you're going to find a way to buy it. That's a necessity. So the price going up or down does not affect demand very much. So we say the demand for a necessity is relatively inelastic. But what about someone who does not need the medication at all? Well, then they won't buy it. Their demand will be elastic. Or what about that Disney World vacation we talked about? It's a luxury. You don't have to have it. So if the price goes up, your demand drops, and demand for that kind of a good will be elastic. So for necessities, if a good is a necessity, demand tends to be more inelastic. If it's a luxury, it tends to be more elastic. The second factor that can affect the elasticity of demand is the availability of close substitutes. In other words, is there something else that we can switch out for the good that we're purchasing that will be fairly close to it, that would be cheaper? Okay? Think about that. Okay? If the price of tickets at Yankee Stadium increases by $5 per ticket, will everybody stop going to cheer the team? Well, ask yourself, are there substitutes available for the tickets to the Yankee game? Well, it depends. If you're a real baseball fan and you love the Yankees, then no, there's nothing that can really substitute for going to the game. But if you're just looking for entertainment, then, well, maybe you could go to a hockey game instead and still get your sports fix. Or maybe you could go see a movie and you'd still have fun going out for the evening. So if there are close substitutes available, if there is some other good that is similar to the good that you're purchasing and you can switch out and buy it because it's cheaper, then the demand for that good will be elastic. Because when the price goes up, we'll switch to the substitute and the demand will drop fairly significantly. But if there are no substitutes available, then you don't have any choice. If you really want it, then you have to pay the price and buy it. And your demand will be relatively inelastic. The next factor that affects demand is the share of income that you spend on the good. If it's a large part of your budget, then your demand will be elastic. If it's a small part of your budget, your demand will be inelastic. For example, if you have more income, does your elasticity increase or decrease for luxuries? Well, if you have more income, your elasticity probably decreases because you can afford a good. So think about things that you buy in your budget. how much salt do you buy in a year? Maybe you spend $3 or $5 a year on salt. What if the price of salt were to double and you still wanted it? Would you pay that even if it doubled? Sure, because $5 or $10 is not a huge part of most people's budgets. So if it's a small part of your budget, your demand is going to be relatively inelastic. The price can go up by quite a bit, but you'll still buy it because you're still not spending a lot of your money on it. But what if it's a car that you're talking about? What if the price of a car goes up by 50%? Well, now that's a large part of your budget. That's a huge hit. If you pay that 50% increase, that's going to eat up a lot of your budget. And so you'll look at that and say, oh, I'm not going to buy the car. So if you spend a large part of your income on a good, the demand will be elastic. If you spend a small part of your income on a good, your demand will be inelastic. And then the last variable that affects elasticity of demand is time. How much time do you have before you need the good? If you can wait for the good or service, then your demand is elastic because you'll say, oh, I can wait. I don't have to buy it now with the price going up, and I'll wait. Think about gross domestic product during recessions. Consumer spending decreases quickly for durable goods because they're more expensive and you can usually put off the purchase. And so time can affect you. Economists have a saying. They say that with enough time, demand for everything is elastic because we can always switch out. For example, think of the gasoline that you purchase. If you have a car and you need to get to work and the price of gas goes up, then you have to put gasoline in your car and your demand won't drop very much. But if enough time goes by and the price remains high, there are other things that you can do. You can carpool, you can move closer to work, you can get a more fuel-efficient car, but all of that takes time. So the more time you have, the more you can switch your demand for something, the more you can find a substitute for it. And so the more time that there is, the more elasticity there will be to your demand. The less time you have, the more inelastic your demand will be. So when we determine if the demand for something is elastic or inelastic, it's really a combination of these four factors that we look at. So when you look at a good or service, ask yourself, is it a necessity or luxury? Are there close substitutes? How much of my income does it take up? And how much time do I have? And then, if more of the variables are leaning to the inelastic side, then the demand will be more inelastic. If more of the variables are leaning to the elastic side, then the demand will be more elastic. Now, there are a couple of special cases that we talk about. The demand for a good can be inelastic or elastic. It can be unit elastic. But there are a couple of special cases. This is a special case. It's called perfectly elastic demand. And what you'll notice here is that the demand curve is horizontal. At the price that is listed here, whatever the price might be, and we haven't labeled the price, so it could be any price that we want, but at the price we have here, consumers will buy an infinite amount. We say that demand is infinitely elastic when it is perfectly elastic. Why? Because if you look at the horizontal demand curve, if the price were to go up, we would go completely off of the demand curve, meaning that there is no reason to pay a higher price. And our demand would not drop if there was a lower price. So the quantity sold will be the same at every single price. We say that demand is perfectly elastic. It is completely responsive to a change in price. So at this price, consumers will buy an unlimited quantity of the good. The other special case is perfectly inelastic demand. When demand is perfectly inelastic, the demand curve is vertical. And the way that you might remember this is that it looks like an I. So I is the first letter in inelastic. So if the curve is horizontal, it's elastic demand. If it's vertical like this one, it's inelastic demand. And this is another special case. So what happens here? Well, as the price goes up, notice that the quantity demanded doesn't change at all. So as we move up the y-axis, the quantity demanded on the horizontal axis stays exactly the same. This might be something like medication, insulin for diabetes would be a good example. Now, in reality, there are no goods in the world that are truly perfectly inelastic, because for any good that we could think of, if the price went high enough, then maybe no one would buy it. Even with insulin, there would be a price at which no one could afford it. But the price for insulin can go very, very high, and if you're a diabetic, you need the medication, and so you're likely to continue to buy it. Your demand won't drop, and if the price goes down, you're not going to buy any more because you're always buying the quantity that you need. So the quantity demanded for insulin would not change very much, and so we would say it's closest to being perfectly inelastic demand. But there are very few things that would have perfectly inelastic demand. So here are examples of the determinants of the elasticity of demand. This is a chart that you might want to make a copy of and place it in your notebook and use it for studying. You may wish to copy this chart into your notes. Pause the video now and copy it into your notebook. But this table shows you the determinants of demand. And it reviews everything that we've just talked about in terms of necessities and luxuries, substitutes, level of income, and the time that you have for buying something. And this shows you not only whether the demand is elastic or inelastic, but it also shows you some examples of this as well. So again, at this point in time, you may wish to pause the video and look at each one of the examples and ask yourself, why is each of these examples an example of that particular determinant? Why does it fit into that case? And it will help you to understand elasticity of demand a little bit better. And then after that, see if you can think of some examples on your own. Now, by calculating the value of elasticity, economists can categorize the demand for goods according to how sensitive consumers are to price changes. And when we come up with this mathematical calculation, we can specify whether demand is elastic, inelastic, or unit elastic, depending upon the value of elasticity. The larger the number means the larger the elasticity. So the greater the percentage change in quantity demanded relative to the percentage change in price, the stronger it is to being a response to a price change. So here is a summary of different elasticities. If demand is very sensitive to price changes, we call it elastic. Airline tickets for vacation travel are an example of that. And the elasticity value would be greater than 1. Now, why does elasticity have this value? It's because the percentage change in the quantity demanded is greater than the percentage change in price. So when the numerator is greater than the denominator, the resulting value will be greater than 1. And so if quantity demanded is changing faster than the percentage change in price, then we say it's very responsive to a change in price and therefore elastic. So any value greater than 1 is going to be elastic demand. Unit elasticity means demand is moderately sensitive to price changes. Soft drinks would be an example of that, and that value would be equal to 1, where the percentage change in quantity demanded would be exactly equal to the percentage change in price. So it's neither elastic nor inelastic. They're changing at the same rate. Any value that is between 0 and 1, therefore any value less than 1, will be inelastic demand, meaning demand is not very sensitive to price changes. Medicine or heating oil would be examples of that, and that will be true where the percentage change in quantity demanded is less than the percentage change in price. So the numerator is smaller than the denominator, and when we divide a smaller numerator by a larger denominator, the result will be a decimal less than 1. And so any value between 0 and 1 will be considered inelastic demand. Now, you might be thinking that the value will be negative because quantity demanded and price are changing in opposite directions. That is true. But from an economist standpoint, we drop the negative sign. It has no meaning to us, and we take the absolute value instead. So what does this look like when it comes to a chart and a table, and we look at it graphically? Notice how the price changes. In letter A, there is a larger response in terms of quantity than in graph B. In other words, when the price of the good goes from $5 to $4, there is a loss of revenue because of the price change. And that is determined by the blue horizontal bars. But there is also an increase in quantity demanded from 50 to 100 slices of pie. And that increase in money is represented by the green bars. And so we have a loss of revenue from the price change, but an increase in revenue from the quantity change. And because the quantity change brought in more additional revenue than we lost with the price change, we say the demand is elastic. And there's another thing that we can say about the shape of the demand curve, and that is, notice it is flatter or less steep, has a lower slope than in letter B, in that example, where the slope is steeper. The flatter the demand curve, the more elastic the demand. And remember our example of perfectly elastic demand, the curve was completely flat and horizontal. So the flatter the demand curve, the more elastic the demand. In letter B, we see an example of inelastic demand. When the price of potted plants goes from $5 to $4, we lose a lot of money, represented by the blue horizontal bars, from dropping the price. But the quantity demanded increases, but only by a little bit, from 90 to 100. So we gain a little money from that, but the money we gain is much less than the money we lose, and therefore, this is considered inelastic demand. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means we can apply something called the total revenue test. For a business or a firm, this is very important. It's important for them to know whether the demand for their good is elastic or inelastic. If the demand for your good is elastic, that means if you lower the price of your good, then you will gain more revenue than you will lose. So the quantity effect is greater than the price effect. And quantity rhymes with E, and elastic begins with the letter E. So if the quantity effect is greater than the price effect, then we move in that direction, the direction of the quantity. And therefore, the revenue increases. If we were to raise the price of the good with elastic demand, then the money that we lose would actually be greater than the money that we gain, and it wouldn't be to our benefit. So if demand is elastic, it tells us as a business, lowering prices can increase revenue, raising prices will decrease revenue. The opposite is true if the demand for our good is inelastic. When we lower the price, notice that we lose a lot of money, but we gain very little money. So we lose more than we gain by lowering prices. Now, if we were to raise prices, we would actually gain more money than we would lose. And so with inelastic demand, if the demand for our good is inelastic, then raising prices will bring in more money to our business, and lowering prices will cause us to lose more money. So with elastic demand, you want to lower price to bring in more revenue, and with inelastic demand, you want to raise prices to bring in more revenue. And so from a business perspective, if you're a business owner and you're in charge of these decisions and you want to know whether to raise prices or not, you have to know if the demand for your good is elastic or inelastic. Now, the third case is letter C, where we have unit elastic demand. And notice if we have unit elastic demand, then the money that we lose when we drop the price is exactly equal to the money that we gain from the increase in quantity, from 80 to 100. So it's a wash. Lowering prices doesn't affect our revenue at all. We have the exact same revenue that we had before when we raised the price. So if it's unit elastic, whether we raise or lower prices really doesn't matter in terms of revenue. So keep in mind what we're talking about when we talk about revenue. Total revenue is all the money consumers spend on a good and firms receive for a good. So when you buy something, you're spending money, but what you're spending it on goes to the business that produced the good, and they receive it. And that's called their revenue. So total revenue is all the money that consumers spend on a good and firms receive for a good during a particular period of time. It can be measured mathematically as the price of the good multiplied by the quantity of the goods sold, or P times Q. Now, changes in total with elastic demand. This reviews what we looked at in the previous slide with the graph. If the price increases and the demand for our good is elastic, total revenue will decrease. But if we decrease the price, total revenue will increase. Now, what about with inelastic demand? If the demand for our good is inelastic, then if we increase the price, total revenue will also increase. If we decrease the price, total revenue will decrease. So once again, it's very important for us to know. Now, what if it's unit elastic? Well, then price increase or decreases lead to a total revenue that is unchanged, so it doesn't matter. And that's why it's very important for us in the business sense to know whether the demand for our good is elastic, inelastic, inelastic, or unit elastic. And so here is a table that summarizes what we've just gone over. The effect of elasticity on the total revenue of a firm. If the demand is elastic, then the effect of price increase on total revenue will be to decline, and the effect of a price drop is that revenue will increase. And then you can see from this the effect that it will have if the demand is inelastic or unit elastic. So here's another chart that you may wish to copy into your notebook and use for study purposes. So now that we have concluded this module lesson, what should you have learned from it? What are your takeaways? Well, first, you should know what elasticity of demand is. You should be able to define it, and you should know what it means in an economic sense. You should know the difference between elastic demand, inelastic demand, and how that is determined based on whether a good is a necessity or a luxury. You should know what unit elastic demand is. You should be able to define the total revenue of a firm and how that is determined based on the elasticity of demand for a particular good. You should also know what a luxury good is and how that affects elasticity of demand. You should know if a good is a close substitute. Now, there's been a lot that you've learned in this module, and there's been a lot thrown at you, and there's probably a lot swimming around in your head right now, and some of this may be very confusing. So this is just a first step. Don't panic. If there's anything in here that you've seen that is confusing, there are a number of things that you can do. You can rewind this video and watch certain parts of it again that may be unfamiliar to you to help you understand them a little bit better. You can pause the video at certain points to take certain notes and things like that. And also, in class, we will be doing lots of practice activities, both practice and graded, that will help you to understand the concept of elasticity of demand.